Welcome to part 8 of a guide to understanding Lashon Hara, Cunning Speech. Today we're going to look at how we pretend and hide the hidden hatred in our hearts with things such as flattery, false humility, and speaking passive-aggressively. If there was any single episode of this series on Lashon Hara that I would want people to watch, it would be this one. Now, not surprisingly, this gets little to no attention because it is one of the worst aspects of Lashon Hara due to it being subversive and covert. And using cunning speech leaves room for doubt, suspicion, causes confusion, and if the perpetrator is called out, there is room for plausible deniability. And almost nobody wants to admit that they do any of these things. When pleasant words are used under the cloak of kindness for malice, this is when we get cunning speech. Even the most beautiful words are nicest compliments when they're said with a frequency that does not match their meaning, or when they're juxtaposed with crafty suggestions. This starts us and others down the path of hypocrisy. Let's take a look. All right, let's look at hypocrisy and the mask we wear, because this is at the heart of cunning speech. Now, hypocrisy is the practice of claiming to have moral standards or beliefs to which one's behavior does not conform. Some related words are dishonesty, insincerity, deception, and duplicity. Now, this word originates from an actor, believe it or not, a disassembler associated with playing a part, pretending, as the Greeks wore masks during their plays. Somewhere around the 13th century, the term moved to moral life to describe anyone who wears a figurative mask as a false pretender to virtue. In Isaiah 9:17, it says, "Therefore the Most High does not rejoice over their young men and has no compassion on their fatherless and widows, for every one is a hypocrite and evil, and every mouth speaks foolishness. With all this, his displeasure has not turned back." Now, the root of this word is to be profaned, to be defiled, polluted, or godless. So right away, we are given a clue how to discern a hypocrite from this verse. Their mouth is evil and it's speaking foolishness. And when we speak cunningly, meaning using good words or saying them with a frequency of wickedness, or cloaking them with a hidden agenda, or pretending in front of people, but in the secret place there is envy, jealousy, anger, unforgiveness, or selfish ambition, then we are hypocrites. Now, the first example I want to look at is false humility. Now, this is cunning speech because you're drawing attention to your actions with words in a way that distorts the integrity of his word. Now, there's three examples Yeshua called out, and he linked them with being a hypocrite. The first one is public announcement of doing good. Now, doing good deeds is not worth extra merit. That's what we have to remember. This is something we're commanded to do. It should be part of our nature. And when we keep it secret, it protects the integrity of the deed and it stops us from being prideful. And the same way, calling attention to ourselves by saying we are just as humble servants or we're unworthy. All right, obviously a humble person would have no need to say such a thing. As we read in Proverbs 27:2, let another man praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. The second was public prayer to be seen and heard in Matthew 6:5. Now, of course, I'm not talking about praying over food or people leading prayer in a service, but I'm talking about those who like to be seen by others or seen as the leader. They want to be important to their fellow man. They might put forth displays of emotion that are not really true, might speak extra loud to be noticed, this kind of thing. And then the third example is public displays of self-imposed affliction, Matthew 6:16. There's a saying that says, we love humility as long as somebody sees it. Now, I want to challenge you because we have things like Pesach coming up, and people are going to spend a lot of time removing leaven and bread and searching for breadcrumbs in toasters and places like this to get it out of their house. But are you not a hypocrite if you don't spend the same amount of time trying to get it out of your heart? What about fasting on Yom Kippur? Have you ever asked yourself, why are you fasting? Are you doing it just because everybody else does? I mean, it's pretty much a spectacle today, and everybody lets everybody know that they're doing it. Is this not a sin? So you need to ask yourself, are you trying to justify your conscience and your spiritual condition? Has your fasting humbled yourself to the point of not committing the sin again? Now, if your fasting impresses on you to no longer speak Lashon Hara, then it certainly was a worthy pursuit. But if you're fasting and you still speak it a few months later, and you're still hiding hatred in your heart, then this was vain, and you've made yourself a hypocrite. This is why it says, written in Colossians 2:23, these indeed have an appearance of wisdom in self-imposed worship, humiliation, and harsh treatment of the body, of no value at all except for satisfaction of the flesh. Now, before anybody gets their shorts in a knot, do not think I'm saying do not fast. I 100% think we should be fasting. But the point here is not to do it in hypocrisy. Now, false humility can also show itself in rebuke or in gossip when speaking about a person's flaws. You can see this in a person who has an agenda against somebody. Perhaps they're envious or jealous, or maybe hold unforgiveness in their hearts, or maybe they just like the attention. Now, it's cunning speech because it manifests deceptively in the following ways. So, first, the person declares himself to have the same trait as the person they have envy towards. So, again, they're pretending to humble themselves, pointing out their so-called flaw in themselves, but they're not doing it to really confess their sin. They're doing it to take advantage of a situation and to try to bring another person down. And of course, the person, now we went over these in some of the common excuses, but it's worth reviewing again. The person says, I would say it to their face. Again, they're pretending that they have nothing to hide. Okay, so the listener is being prepped to think that they're not really gossiping. Okay, but again, you're advancing an agenda. And of course, the rebuker says, I say this in love. Again, they're trying to sound humble to advance an agenda. But if you're saying something in love, then it has the attributes of love. And rebuke is always done with the goal of restoration. Your heart's desire is the restoration of your brother, not to put forth an agenda. If you have any other motive, then perhaps you should keep quiet. Let's look at flattery. Now flattery is excessive or insincere praise. It's adulation, excessive admiration with manipulative intentions. It's a double heart. You're a hypocrite, an actor pretending. And it's cunning and insidious because it preys on a normal person's desire to be recognized and appreciated. In Psalm 12:2-3, it says, they speak falsehood with each other. They speak with flattering lips, a double heart. So, person who flatters, their heart is not steadfast. It's a double heart, and it's falsehood. And this is Lashon Hara. And the Heavenly Father cuts them off, any tongue that's speaking swelling words. Okay, you are exaggerating something that is not in its true state. Let's look at some examples. Proverbs 24:24, he who says to the wrong, you are righteous, peoples curse him, nations despise him, but those who rebuke the wrong, it is pleasant and a good blessing comes upon them. Right? A leader who flatters his followers or is executing his function as ruler unfairly, right? Saying, as is written here, saying to the wrong, you are righteous. Eventually, this person will become despised. Proverbs 29:5, a man that flatters his neighbor, he's spreading a net for his steps. No, not for his neighbor, but for himself, because eventually his words are going to catch his own feet. And for people often flatter for their own gain to get something out of another person. They're not really giving a genuine compliment. And Romans 16:18, for such ones do not serve our Master Yeshua HaMashiach, but their own stomach, and by smooth words and flattering speech, they deceive the hearts of the innocent. And a teacher who flatters their followers, speaking things to tickle their ears, meaning only nice things or topics unlikely to offend. Sometimes they do this to maintain their positions, especially if their salary depends upon it. But what happens? It says the hearts of the innocent, they get deceived. Let's look at 3 different types of flattery so that we are aware not to do it, but also be on guard against others who might speak it. The first example we see is in Matthew 22. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to trap him in his words. And then they sent to him their taught ones with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true, and you teach the way of Elohim in truth. And it does not concern you about anyone, for you are not partial to any man. Then say to us, what do you think? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? So here the intention is spelled out for us. These leaders, they plotted, they gossiped and conspired how to trap him. And what does it say? How? With words. So the tactic is to get you to be trapped in your words. And what did they do? They masked their intentions with flattery. They covered over their wickedness with kind words. They were trying to butter him up. So they try to soften him. So maybe he would be partial towards them instead of holding fast to righteousness in the Torah. Now, if you do not get along with somebody, but you're trying to get something from them, then people will often try this tactic. They might flatter you to let your guard down. How? So you're trapped in your own words. And Yeshua answers them that he knew inside their wickedness, and he was, of course, on guard to this sort of thing. And what did he call them? Hypocrites for trying him. The next example of flattery is sanctioning sinful behavior. In Proverbs 17:5, it says, He that justifies the wicked and he that condemns the righteous, even they are an abomination to Adonai. Proverbs 28:23, He who reproves a man finds more favor afterward than he who flatters with the tongue. So people often do not speak up against sinful behavior like Lashon Hara for fear of going against the crowd or fear of offending perhaps their friend. They'll say things like, you did no wrong, you're still a good person. And so they're flattering them instead of being honest and rebuking unrighteousness. We also see that people who justify wickedness, they are putting themselves in opposition to the righteous. And if you put yourself in that position, you are putting yourself as an abomination to the Most High. And unfortunately, these days, if gossip or slander or flattery is rebuked, people will look at you in shock and say things like, how can you be so harsh? They end up siding with the wicked. Now remember in Exodus 23, it says, do not follow a crowd to do evil. Okay, and this is, you can end up being caught in situations of gossip, right? Do not bear witness in a strife, to turn aside after many, or to turn aside what is right. So don't flatter people with your words. Don't turn aside what is right. The third example is self-flattery to deny the truth. 1 Corinthians 3:18, let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you seems to be wise in this age, let him become foolish so that he might become wise. And of course, we don't always have the answers to every question. And it's okay to admit this. Let us learn to be wise in the simple, good deeds, good speech, good conduct, walking humbly with our Elohim. And then, of course, John 4:34, Elohim is spirit, and those who worship him need to worship in spirit and truth. So often we will flatter ourselves to deceive ourselves, because looking at the truth of what's in our hearts understandably is painful. So we rather speak flattering words to ourselves, saying he loves us, and yes, this is true, but we use this as a crutch to ignore the problem and just keep going on about our lives, thinking that we're blessed and everything is fine. 1 John 2:4, the one who says, I know him and does not guard his commands is a liar, and the truth is not in him. So do we say we know him, but then put on a show of false humility? Or do we say we know him and flatter someone to get something? How do we say he lives in us and we know him when we do these things? This is the opposite of knowing him and guarding his commands. Here's some biblical examples of flattery. Absalom, he used flattery to steal the hearts of the men of Israel. And of course, hearts are to be earned, not stolen. The 400 false prophets of King Ahab, right? They used flattery to tell King Ahab and King Jehoshaphat to go up against Ramoth Gilead, and they would be delivered into their hands. And of course, Hasatan, was it not flattery to say that they could be like Elohim if they ate from the tree of knowledge? We know Paul resisted flattery for gain. In 1 Thessalonians 2, 3-6, it says, the appeal we make does not come from delusion, nor from uncleanness, nor from deceit, but we have been approved by Elohim to be entrusted with the good news, so we speak not as pleasing men, but Elohim who proves our hearts. For we never came with a word of flattery, as you know, nor with a cloak for greed. Elohim is witness, nor are we looking for praise from men, not from you, nor from others, that we could have been a burden to you as missionaries of Messiah. So we see flattery is linked with delusion, uncleanness, deceit. Flattery is pleasing men, and it's a double heart. It's a cloak for greed, as we're going to see in a few minutes about self-ambition. So we need to be careful about how we're using our words here with flattery. Now, the next example of cunning speech I want to look at is speaking passive aggressively. Now, the definition here is marked by or displaying behavior characterized by the expression of negative feelings, resentment, and aggression, but it's done in an unassertive, passive manner. And this is very, very tricky. And it's prevalent in our society today because of hatred or envy or unforgiveness or general unhappiness of how things are. We need to be careful that this root of bitterness does not take hold of us. So what it does is it presents a false image, a behavior that expresses anger covertly. It avoids direct dealings and it causes confusion. And this type of behavior has become very normalized and readily accepted today that I felt it needed special attention. I think it's a language we can call mass contempt. Now, it's mass contempt because it's passive, so we're displaying our disapproval of somebody indirectly, and we're masking our true feelings. Okay, and again, if you're wearing a mask, you're being a hypocrite. It's aggressive, it's indirect anger, but it's still anger. All right, and you're trying to cover your tracks to look innocent. This is what's so insidious about it. It's dishonest because you're not saying what you mean. Your yes isn't yes and your no isn't no. It's confusing because indirect words are open to interpretation. It avoids responsibility. Indirect words leave room for plausible deniability. And of course, it's Lashon Hara and cunning speech because you're being dishonest, confusing, aggressive, and you're secretly hating your neighbor. Does the text have anything to say about speaking passive aggressively? Indeed it does. Proverbs 12:22. Lying lips are an abomination to Adonai, but those who deal truly are his delight. Words not true or sincere, that are spoken with a frequency of malice, are lies. You know this is easily detectable because someone can say I love you with meaning, or someone can say I love you sarcastically. Obviously, one is not true. We also should not exaggerate to make something seem more true than it really is. As it is written, the remnant of Israel does not have a tongue of deceit in their mouth. He that conceals hatred is of lying lips, and that's what speaking passive aggressively is. You're hiding something in your heart, but eventually it's going to manifest. Passive aggressiveness is language which tries to conceal, but it starts coming out in subtle ways. Jeremiah 9:8 says, their tongue is a slaying arrow. It speaks deceit. It's speaking peaceably to his neighbor with his mouth, but in his heart he's setting an ambush. Okay, and passive aggressive people, they will often temporarily agree in the moment only to blindside you later. Proverbs 26:23, he that hates disassembles with his lips, but he lays up deceit within him. When he speaks fair, believe him not, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. And passive aggressive speech builds up over time. Eventually, it will be impossible to conceal. Because he hates his lips, even when he's speaking fairly, he's actually tearing down instead of building up the house of the Most High. And a person with concealed hatred in the heart but speaks with fair words apparently has 7 abominations in the heart. This is the only thing that he's building. Proverbs 26:28, a lying tongue hates those it bruises, and a flattering mouth works ruin. His speech, which is not completely honest, has hatred to its frequency, and therefore it bruises a person. So here we see a link that flattery and passive aggressiveness are related because both cause ruin in the end. Let's look at some passive aggressive examples. Obviously, ghosting, unfriending, or the silent treatment. The person does not want to be straightforward or honest, so runs away. Not all these situations are being passive aggressive. The other party could have tried 100 times to reach out to this person and then ends up ghosting them because they gave up. So again, you have to use your judgment. Subtle sabotage of a mutual agreement, for example. A person might have agreed to something, but then later they changed their mind. Instead of being honest and direct, they might sabotage the situation and set people up for failure in order to have an excuse to exit. You might see this in an unhappy marriage. The person might start arguments over petty issues in order to have a reason to leave and not take all of the blame. Backhanded compliments or apologies. They might say things like, no matter what people say, I like you. And what is this doing? It's pointing to others not liking him. Or, sorry, it wasn't meant as an insult. And this leaves room for a person to cover their tracks. They might be contempt in their speech, such as sarcasm, which is, mocking and jest. They might be use words with verbal ambiguity, right? So these are indirect words causing confusion. Disrespectful action. They might be habitually late, procrastinate, miss appointments. They might not keep their promises. And of course, negative body language, eye rolling, looking at phone, turning your back on a person, showing interest in anything other than the person speaking. This kind of behavior is so prevalent among our society, and I do realize we live in oppressed times, and certainly not everyone being passive aggressive has an evil heart or evil intentions. It might be the only way they have to express themselves. However, that does not mean it's not Lashon Hara, and it does not mean it's not disrespectful. It's a serious matter that we need to address within ourselves. So if you find yourself meeting any of these conditions, please find a trusted friend and talk about it and start addressing the situation. Here are some other examples of how we might be passive aggressive. We might remind people of past deeds. Now, this could be intentional, but also accidental. And the point is to become aware, not to remind people of their mistakes. We need to allow room for correction and room to grow. And we all know sometimes we make the same mistake repeatedly before being able to change. And the Most High, He does not remember our sins anymore, and He allows us to move on, and He's patient with us. Thus, we need to do the same for others. Blame shifting. Now, this is a manipulative behavior where someone deflects the responsibility for their actions or their mistakes onto another person, group, or situation in order to avoid the consequences or maintain control. We see this in a group setting like a committee. So, for example, a person might question a committee member about the outcome of a vote, and the member might say they were outvoted. Thus, they shift the blame instead of being one with the committee that they were on. And of course, covert criticism, it's subtle, indirect form of negativity, often disguised as humor, concern, or helpful advice that aims to undermine or control someone by making them feel inadequate or self-doubting. It can involve passive-aggressive remarks or backhanded compliments, focusing on minor flaws like we just saw. Now, there are several reasons why we might speak passive-aggressively or flatter or have false humility. And I want to take a look at those. The first one is being fearful or being insecure with ourselves. And it usually manifests in this sense of powerlessness and projection. So when a person lacks the courage to face their personal character traits that they dislike about themselves, what they do is they project them onto another person as a coping mechanism. And this deflects the eyes away from them. And we live in a society where we have weak morals and integrity, and we try to mask this. So fear naturally prevails in such a society as this. And what we do is we project onto others what we fear most about ourselves. So an example would be David, who of course projected his shortcomings on the rich man in the parable about his theft of the lamb. And today, when a man of Elohim comes near, people are fearful because they see their shortcomings in a mirror, and they get insecure about it. So they often will use cunning tactics like projection, or they'll speak passive-aggressively or flattery they'll do some aspect of cunning speech to undermine them. And a good verse to look at this is Matthew 7:3. Why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not notice the plank in your own eye? Again, Yeshua is teaching us to look inward, not outward. This is how we address the problems of today. The next reason is envy and jealousy. Now, jealousy is fearing you might lose what you have. In spiritual circles, this happens often with positions of power, such as King Saul, David, and the fame that he was receiving. Envy is wanting what somebody already has, fame, success, relationships. But in spiritual circles, it's usually when a person sees another closer to the Most High than themselves, or they have a higher spiritual standing. So some examples, jealousy, well, Cain murdered Abel. Now most people forget that he had the rights of the firstborn, so when Abel's offering was accepted, Cain became fearful of his position being taken away. And King Saul was fearful of David taking over his kingship and tried to kill him. Envy, of course, is Joseph's brothers, and with Yeshua, both cases envy turned to plotting and violence. And today we see people jealous or envious of people who are perhaps farther along in their spiritual walk. And so they start acting in covert and cunning ways, using things like cunning speech towards them. Now, of course, one of the main reasons for Lashon Hara is unforgiveness. And naturally, if you're unforgiving, you might be prone to using cunning language. Now, we need to have empathy towards people who have had past experiences of being abused or mistreated or abandoned, especially during childhood, but anytime. This can lead to deep-seated anger and hatred. And of course, it can cause difficulties in true forgiveness. So a person might say that they forgive them but in their speech, but their body language, as we saw with being passive aggressive, may say otherwise. Now, even though we need to be understanding, it doesn't mean it doesn't need to be addressed. It's still Lashon Hara. An example I want to point out is the unforgiving servant parable in Matthew 18. Now, what is forgotten here, or not usually pointed out, is that the unforgiving servant had his pardon revoked. Now, that's a pretty important detail. And of course, it's also written that the person who forgives little loves little, and the person who forgives much loves much. And today, unfortunately, we can see in the body of Hamashiach people holding on to grudges. Even if they've been accidentally offended, they cut them off, and there seems to be a little desire to reconcile. The last reason is selfish ambition, is why someone might use the cunning speech we've covered. They might have a need for belonging, attention, power, money. Maybe they're just trying to create an identity to fill a void in their lives. These are not reasons to be using and speaking in the Most High's behalf. Some examples we saw David's son Absalom. Obviously, we already saw that he tried to win the hearts of the people through deception. And of course, Adoniah, who attempted to crown himself king. But also the disciples who disputed in Luke 22 of who was the greatest. All right? Selfishly seeking to be recognized as the greatest disciple. What did he say? Not so with you, but let him who is the greatest among you be as the youngest, and the leader as one who serves. James 3:14-16, but if you have bitter jealousy and self-seeking in your hearts, okay, where is it? It's in your heart. Do not boast against and lie against the truth. Okay, it's something proud. It's something you're lying. What is this? It's not wisdom coming down from above, but it is earthly, unspiritual. It's demonic. For where jealousy and self-seeking are, there is confusion and every foul deed. And we already saw Paul, he came to the people without using any selfish reasons or using any flattery. So we see how jealousy, envy, selfish ambition, flattery, these are all things related to cunning speech. All right, I want to look at 3 different ways, action, words, and body language, that hidden hatred manifests through fear, envy, jealousy, unforgiveness, or selfish ambition. Of course, there's going to be a bit of crossover from what we talked about in the passive aggressive section. So first, our actions, all right, it's going to reveal itself through calculated behaviors that are meant to undermine, exclude, or sabotage the person. So subtle sabotage, such as intentionally keeping a person out of the loop on important projects. Maybe you withhold information from them, or you even spread rumors to ruin their reputation. Exclusion from social situations. Okay, forgetting to invite someone or create an unwelcoming atmosphere in a group setting. And this is obviously can be cliquey in ministries or certain churches. Okay, lack of empathy or celebration, refusing to acknowledge achievements or showing muted or negative energy when something positive happens to this person. And the opposite, inappropriate happiness and struggle, seemingly being smug or quietly satisfied when the hated person is suffering, failing, or experiencing a crisis. Okay, those last two, you're not being joyful and sharing in another person's joy, or you're not mourning with others who mourn. Now, in our word, most of these are ready today, but just a quick review, right? A smoke screen disguises malice that carry an energetic vibration of contempt. We talked about flattery already, right? You're speaking kindly to someone's face, but behind their backs, you're using words to manipulate. And of course, we talked about backhanded compliments, insults disguised as praise, all right? You're saying something to make the recipient feel insecure while allowing yourself to seem polite. And of course, passive aggressive comments, which is, using sneaky words, double meaning remarks. They're meant to hurt, but they're covered by the defense of just kidding. Sarcasm and condescension, using condescending tone or inappropriate humor to belittle the person. And you're using this under the guise of playful banter. And of course, conversational narcissism. This is frequently interrupting or talking over another person or immediately shifting the focus back to themselves, to deny validation of that person. And then finally, body language. Right? The body often leaks the true emotion before the mind can construct a polite facade, often termed micro-expressions. So these are some of the things you might notice when someone has fear, envy, jealousy, unforgiveness, or selfish ambition. Or you might notice them within yourself. Of course, avoidance of eye contact, deliberately looking away, checking the phone. Tense body language. This could be the evil eye. Right? Forced smiles, grimaces, crossed arms, or just angling your body away from the person, showing a lack of respect. Sudden shift in energy, a noticeable coldness or abrupt silence when the person enters a room and the hater is already comfortable and laughing with others, and then suddenly goes cold. And of course, walking away. The person might walk away mid-sentence to end the conversation, finishing their words en route. Or they might even pretend they're busy looking flustered to avoid interaction. If you find yourself doing one of these things, okay, whether it be actions, words, or body language that we just covered, there's a good chance there's some sort of fear, envy, jealousy, unforgiveness, or selfish ambition in your heart, and it needs to be addressed. Just to close, Matthew 23:19-22, it says, "Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that sets the gift apart? He then who swears by the altar swears by it and by all that is upon it, and he who swears by the dwelling place swears by it and by him who's dwelling in it. And he who swears by the heavens swears by the throne of Elohim and by him who is sitting upon it." So is not the Heavenly Father in our hearts? Is this not the place of the Brit Chadashah, the new covenant? Do you not say you love him with all your heart and soul? Okay, if we're hiding hatred in our hearts in these ways that we went over today, we're being hypocrites. We need to stop being a hypocrite. How do we say that we serve him when we're hiding these things? Are we not wearing a mask? How can we say we're in covenant in him? We cannot be offering up our prayers and our petitions or spiritual sacrifices to the Most High on these altars of our hearts and expect them to be respected when being so cunning. So please think, when does this war end, this spiritual war? Our brothers and sisters, we're supposed to be on the same side that call on his name. We're not supposed to be against each other. Does it not start with each and every single one of us looking in the mirror? 2 Chronicles 16:9, for the eyes of the Heavenly Father diligently search through all the earth to show himself strong on behalf of who? Those whose heart is perfect towards him. Okay? And we show our perfection towards him by being good to other people, not by concealing hatred or envy or jealousy or using his name in selfish ambition. That brings us to the end of part 8. Now we all know that famous verse from Isaiah 61, how the Spirit of the Heavenly Father comes over Yeshua, and how he says he was sent to bind up the brokenhearted. Of course, most of us can relate to this as one who has been deeply hurt. But how about another perspective? Is not a heart that speaks nice words, but underneath the cloak, the intention is cunning and deceptive? Is this not a heart that is not working properly? A heart that's perhaps broken? So today, if you find yourself convicted that you might be speaking flattery or making displays of false humility, perhaps there's animosity towards a friend secretly and you speak passive aggressively. Perhaps it's your heart that needs healing. So why not call out to him in all humility and ask for help? I know this was a tough one, but I'm betting that whoever addresses these matters within themselves will not only go on to produce much fruit, but be loved and cherished by our Heavenly Father. In part 9, we look at scorners, scoffers, and mockers, a very dangerous aspect of Lashon Hara, which causes spiritual drunkenness and blindness, rendering the scorner unable to have eyes to see or ears to hear. So thank you for joining us, and I leave you with this meditation.